Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Ashrafil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In this week's lesson in Hadith, we are going to be looking at 3 hadiths. The 3 hadiths are very short, and also the topic of these hadiths have come many times before. So therefore the idea of today's lesson would be just to understand the words of the hadith and what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is trying to say from these blessed words. Now the first hadith which we are going to look at, narrated by Abu Hurairah anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Qala Allahu Ta'ala," that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said. So in other words, this hadith is known as a hadith Qudsi. And hadith Qudsi are basically words by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or words from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicated by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is the main difference between, say for example, Quran and Hadith. That in Quran the words are directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we read, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, the Holy Quran, Ar-Rahman Rahim, Min al-Jinnati wal Nas, these verses, they are actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's spoken words. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke it or communicated it, obviously only Allah knows best, but it is our belief that the words of the Holy Quran is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's spoken words. But Hadith Qudsi are again saying it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's spoken words, but this time communicated through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's why we don't call it Quran, we don't call it Wahiyya Matlu, but instead it's known as Wahiyya again Matlu, i.e. the Hadith. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كذبني ابن آدم ولم يكن له ذلك, that the sons of Adam, the children of Adam, have attributed كذبني, falsehood to me. In other words, the human beings, the children of Adam, have lied, have made a lie against me, have fabricated against me. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ ذَلِكَ, then goes on to say that it is not appropriate for them to have done that. I.e. the children of Adam who made this slander or fabrication against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is not appropriate for them to do that. And then the hadith then goes on to say, what was the lie they made against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is this fabrication, what is this falsehood they have made against Allah? So the hadith then goes on to say, لَيْ يُعِيدَنِي كَمَا بَدَأَنِي, which in other words means that they have said that He, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will never resurrect us again the same way He created us the very first time. In other words, the lie or the falsehood they're making against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unable to bring us back to life. I.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unable of resurrection, ba'ath. And again this theme, Mufti Sahib has been covering quite a bit of it in Surah Mu'minun in particular, where this topic comes quite a few times about the mushrikeens of Makkah, the deniers of life after death, saying, oh well, you know, when a bone turns into dust, or when bones are turned into soil, when it's turned into rubble and grit, how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resurrect us? So again, the answers Mufti Sahib has given many times in the Quran tafsir. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this is their falsehood they have attributed against me, that I am unable to resurrect But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then goes on to say, وَلَيْسَ أَوَّلُ الْخَلْقِ بِأَحْوَنَ عَلَيَّ مِنْ عِيَادَتِهِ. Isn't the first creation not more difficult upon me than bringing it back to life? In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that making someone from, i.e. Adam alayhi salam, making Adam alayhi salam from mud and soil is far more difficult, on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than resurrecting when somebody passes away. Again, this is like a theme which is mentioned in countless of places in the Holy Quran. In other words, just take an example of, you want to make, say, a bench, or you want to make, say, a mobile phone. Now, to make it the very first time is very difficult. If you want to make a bench the very first time, you need to look for some wood, you need to get the nails, you need to get the hammer to make something sophisticated as this dictaphone here or this mobile phone is something which is very difficult. You need to get parts from here, you need to get parts from there. You need the top people, the top doctors, the top professors working behind this small microchip. And when they've done that and then you put it together, that is more difficult. But now just imagine this dictaphone here, a part of it has broken. Or just imagine this bench here, the leg of this bench has broken. Now to resurrect it, i.e. to make it again, is simple. You just get that extra leg and you just hammer it in. Or just say something wrong with this dictaphone, you just take it to these repair shops and they'll do it for you easily. But to make it from scratch, that is very difficult. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that how on earth these people are saying that Allah cannot resurrect them, when you look at it logically, it was far more difficult to make something from scratch than resurrecting. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was able to when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was able to create someone from scratch, was able to create someone from mud, from soil, from water, then don't you think that it's going to be far more easier for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to resurrect someone when the base of that person is still there, when the skeleton of that person is still there, when the backbone of that person is still there? There's a base there for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to resurrect that person. So this is like the first falsehood, the first fabrication the non-believers, in particular the deniers of the hereafter, atheists in particular, they have made against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and its answer have been given here. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say that there are some people who also shatter money, who also say bad things against me, who swear at me. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ ذَلِكَ, and it's not appropriate for them to swear against me. It's not appropriate for them to make these evil or bad or nasty comments against me. And what is the swear? What is the rebuke which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to? It then goes on to say in the last part of the hadith, فَقَوْلُهُ اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا وَأَنَا الْأَحَدُ الصَّمَدُ الَّذِي لَمْ أَلِدْ وَلَمْ أُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لِي كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. That they comment that Na'udhu billah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a son. The comment of those people, in particular Christians, who believe that Isa alayhi salam is the son of God. And not only that, you have some Jews, not all of them, but some Jews who believe a prophet in the name of Uzair alayhi salam to be the son of God. And you also have some mushrikeens who believe that the angels, malaika, are the banatullah, are the daughters of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because there were many categories of idol worshipping and mushrikeens in Makkah. It's like, say, nowadays where you have Christians, there's so many categories of them. Some are Catholics, some are Protestants, some are Trinitarians, some are Unitarians, some are this, some are that. So similarly here in the Mushrikeens of Makkah, there were so many of them. Some were proper, hardcore idol worshippers. Some were such that they believed in God or they believed in Allah, but they worshipped idols because they believed that the idols will intercede for them. Some, same thing, that they believed in Allah, but they would worship angels, thinking that the angels, being the daughter of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will intercede for them in the hereafter. So you had so many like factions of Mushrikeens in Makkah. So this is some of the comments either you could say the Christians, the Mushrikeens or the Jews would make, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has children. Ittakhazallahu waladan. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wa ana al-ahad, that I am one, as-samad, that I am independent. I'm not in need of anyone. A father is in need of his son. He may not be at this moment in time, but when the father reaches 50, 60 and he's got a business, he needs his son to look after it. Or when he reaches 50, 60 retirement age, he needs his, say for example, son to look after him, his daughter to look after him. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent, as-samad. And then he goes on to say, Allazi lam alid, Allah doesn't procreate, walam ulad, and nor was he procreated. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, na'udhu billah, doesn't have a wife, and the relationship between a man and a woman, a husband and wife, which then leads to children being born, sons and daughters. Na'udhu billah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a wife. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't procreate. Walam ulad, and nor was he procreated. In other words, nor was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created by someone. Nor was he, na'udhu billah, offspring of someone. Nor does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a father or a grandfather, because the reason why is because Allah is independent. Because those who have children, those who have fathers, those who have grandfathers, then they are the opposite of samad. They are the opposite of being independent. Because remember, as-samad, this is like us moving slightly away from the topic. The word samad is a specific attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only Allah can be samad. So therefore, if somebody's name is Abdul Samad, which is a nice name, a good name, but to call that person with the name Samad, don't, without taking away the Abd and just calling Samad, Samad, come here, then that would be wrong. Why? Because you're calling that person away, na'udhu Allah's name. You're calling Allah, na'udhu come here. So this is something which is a unique attribute, a specific attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Samad, like the word Ar-Rahman, that's a specific attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if somebody is called Abdul Rahman, then to call him Rahman, come here, then that is also wrong and impermissible as well. Now the next hadith, so this was again talking about belief, because remember the chapter which we are touching on at the moment is about belief and is about Imaan. Now the next hadith, again referring to beliefs got to do with our Imaan, is a hadith narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, Qala Allah ta'ala, again, so it's a hadith Qudsi, that Ibnu Adam yu'dhini, that the son of Adam, the children of Adam, they harm me. They give me harm, they give me taklif. In other words, they say some things which affects me, which harms me. Now what is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being harmed by? It says, Yasubbu dahra. They curse, they make vile comments about time. Dahra. Now what do you mean by making comments or wrong comments, incorrect comments about time? This was actually something which the pagans of Makkah, the Mushrikeens of Makkah, and also those who weren't believers make, and even sometimes, even some Muslims nowadays make as well, about time. Like, what I mean by that is, they'll wake up in the morning and they'll see, oh, it's all dark, it's all muggy, it's all foggy, and they think, oh, today's going to be a really bad day. Today's a really worst day. Today's, they just make this kind of comment that, oh, why is it like rainy today? I've got like, football, I've got to catch the bus, or I've got to do this, they make these kind of comments about time. Oh, look at time, it just goes so quickly. Make sometimes rude comments about time. So this was actually a practice of the pagans of Makkah, obviously slowly kind of filtered down to even believers as well, who start making comments about weather, time, about the wind, about everything. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that people, they rebuke, they make vile comments about time, but little they realize, وَأَنَا الدَّهْرُ, I am time. I am time. What does that mean, I am time? It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has time in His control. The responsible person of time is who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can't stop time. The seconds which are drifting along in our life, we can't stop it. But only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can stop time, and He will stop it when He decides that enough is enough and Qiyamah will come. So Allah is in control of time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is responsible of time. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying from this hadith Qudsi, that those who make comments about time, rebuke time, in fact they are making comments about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are swearing at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like, say for example, you're responsible for a particular organization or a particular company. So any kind of things which goes wrong in that company, any kind of comments, any kind of the way the employees are being treated, it is though that it's going back to the manager, it's going back to the boss, it's going back to the head of the company. Why? Because it's his rules, he's the one who runs the place. So here, when you're making comments about time, you're not actually affecting time. Time's not getting hurt about you, because time is under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're making that comment against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he goes on to say that بِيَدَيَّ الْأَمْرُ, that the amr, i.e. the command of time, is under my control. أُقَلِّبُ اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارِ, and I alternate day and night. Or al-layla wal-nahar, i.e. night and day. In other words, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who alternates day and night. Day comes, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then orders the sun to set, and the night comes, then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides, He then orders the sun to rise. So the days alternating, like sunlight, daylight, and then nighttime. This is all through the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this second hadith in a nutshell is explaining that time, the control of time, day and night, all this is under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those who make bad comments about it, they are in fact making vile and wrong or incorrect comments about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. And the next hadith, again, which is similar to the first hadith which we had read in today's lesson, about ascribing partners to Allah, or saying Nauzubillah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has children. Hadith narrated by Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radhiyallahu anhu, from the very famous tribe in Yemen called the tribe of Ash'ariyin, who has mentioned many hadiths in Bukhari. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam praising them for having Imaan and having hikmat. Al-Imanu Yamaniyun, al-Hikmatu Yamaniyatun, or kama qala alayhi salatu wasalam, mentioned the hadith. So this is like one of the virtues of this tribe who are from Yemen. So in this hadith, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radhiyallahu anhu narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Ma ahadun asbara ala adhan yasma'uhu min Allah yad'una lahu al-walada thumma yu'afihim wa yarzuquhum muttafaqun alayh." I.e., there is no one who bears more patience and more sabr than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. There is no one who bears more patience than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. We think that when somebody says something nasty to us, or we're doing so much sabr, or when we are praying namaz and somebody's making some noise in the corner, we think, oh, we're doing so much sabr. But actually, who's doing the most sabr is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Now why? He's doing sabr when people wrongly are saying that such and such a person, or Isa alayhi salam, or Uzair alayhi salam, or the angels are his son. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears that, he gets so angry. You know, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted, this is just Allah's mercy and his fadl and his goodness over this world, that if Allah wanted, he could have destroyed this world. Even the believers, when he hears somebody say that Isa alayhi salam is the son of God, or when he hears somebody say that such a person is the son of God, Allah gets so angry. If he wanted, he could have destroyed the entire dunya and earth because of that very same comment. But what Allah does, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he does sabr. He bears the comments, the vile comments which are being made. And not only that, it then goes into summa yu'afihim, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is willing to forgive them. Imagine that somebody making such a, let's say somebody made a really nasty comment against you. You know, we wouldn't stop until we take revenge against that person. So when somebody makes a comment that Allah has children, Allah has sons, Allah has daughters, he gets so angry that if he wanted, he could have destroyed the entire dunya. The entire universe would have come to an end. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he does so much sabr. But not only that, look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and rahmah, that he even forgives them as well. So if they were to ever convert to Islam, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive the bad things they said about Allah before. As mentioned in the hadith, says, Al-Islamu yahdimu ma kana qabla, that Islam kind of eradicates all the sins, all the things which you had done before. By converting to Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wipes them away. So then it goes on to say that Allah forgives them. And then it goes on to say that if they say, for example, don't ask for forgiveness, وَيَرْزُقُهُمْ, Allah, even though they are still in their wrong beliefs, in their wrong aqaids, in their wrong motives, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَيَرْزُقُهُمْ still provides provisions for them. So look at that. Somebody saying something nasty, sinister against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he could have destroyed them, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does sabr, bears patience, doesn't destroy them. He's willing to forgive them. He's willing to look over what they had said. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also willing to provide their rizq and their sustenance. Like what happened with the Banu Israel, that when they were wandering around the valley of Tih for 40 years. So it was a punishment from Allah. But even then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows his mercy, and he still provides food for them by giving them man and salwa. And there's so many examples of that, where, because, and the reason why is because, as mentioned in the Quran, وَمَا مِن دَابَةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken the responsibility himself to provide the provisions of every single human being. So irrespective how evil this human being is, irrespective of how nasty comments he may be saying about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, irrespective of how many plans or how many let's burn Quran days they are holding, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still provide for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still provide sustenance for them. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's amazing mercy and amazing rahmah upon the people of this world. Now you may be thinking that why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so kind to us and to these people? The reason why is because first and foremost, this dunya, there's no value to Allah. Allah literally is not bothered about this dunya. The word dunya itself, dana yadlu dunuwan, means something insignificant, something which is no value at all. That's why it's mentioned in a hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that if this dunya had some value, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't have given a disbeliever a glass of water to drink if he had any value. So because there's no value, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving people the enjoyment, is giving people wealth, is giving people water to drink, because Allah doesn't have any value to this world. But if there was any value, then obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have been very strict. If somebody had said these kind of things, Allah wouldn't have fed that person. Allah wouldn't have provided for that person. Those people who make plans and devices and makaru wa makar Allah, they make makar and deceptions against Allah, Allah would not have given them anything. But because this dunya is so insignificant in the eyes of Allah, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still bestowing His mercy and rahmah upon the people. May Allah give us the ability to act on what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.